friends, I'm Asiatu.
And I'm Mairi.
And together, we're the Audacious Autistics Podcast. We're both queer, non-binary, intuitive coaches, creating a safe space to discuss everything from autism to astrology, including social justice, intersectionality, and more, living unmasked and out loud.
Today, we're releasing a bonus episode that would normally just go to our Patreon users. So if you like receiving more content and are able to help support us financially, you can find the links to our Patreon in the description. So today, we're going to be chatting about ourselves.
Yay!
Thank you for tuning in. We hope this chat brings you a better picture of who we are. So for those that don't know, I know Asiatu through social media, which is one of the most popular ways for people, especially neurodivergent and queer folks, to find and connect with their people. So I've been witnessing and learning from Asiatu for a few years now, and I think it's safe to say that we've become really good friends and we share a lot of the same lived experience. So we're just going to start with that. So straight to the point of why we're here. So Asiatu, I know your story of discovering that you're autistic, but for our listeners that haven't yet heard it, do you mind to share that discovery story with them?
Sure, no problem. So you know my discovery story because you're a huge integral part of my discovery story, but I will break it down. So last May, I believe, you had made a social media post on Facebook that broke down traits specifically in autistic girls and women. And I think there was like a list of maybe like 12 or 13 traits. And of the traits listed, all of them applied to me, every single one of them. And it was at that moment that I was like, holy shit, am I autistic?
Right.
And I was like, wait, what? And I have been diagnosed with other neurodivergence in puberty. I was diagnosed ADHD, anxiety, depression, and learning disabilities. So I knew that, I had different struggles and issues, but autism was never considered, never once. And I had been to multiple therapists, and some said anxiety was my main issue, some said depression was the main issue. And then I also was able to get some support in school with on-time testing for my learning disabilities. But it wasn't until seeing that post that the light bulb went off, and I was like, wow, I may be autistic. And then I went from there. I did the typical autistic thing and autism became my special interest. And I went and I jumped down the rabbit hole, and I just tried to absorb everything autistic and all the information. I want all the things autistic, give me. And the more I read, and the more, especially specifically for how it presents differently in AFAB people.
Yeah.
Assigned female at birth. And it was, my concept of autism had obviously been the stereotypical presentation of it, and which are traits based on basically white boys. And so once I discovered like traits of AFAB girls and women, I was just like, oh my gosh, that's me. And then I found, I think Paige Lael was the next person that I found, that her video, and she broke down traits, and I was just like, everything that majority of what she said also I could relate to and resonated with me. And I was just like, wow. So then, a few months later, fast forward to October, I finally built up enough courage to seek medical diagnosis. And I was able to find a Black autistic therapist, another unicorn. And I was diagnosed, and it made sense. It's the root of everything, that all of my struggles, all of my issues, everything, it just all clicked.
Yeah. So fair to say that it was like, you got this new part of you, kind of like a label for it, and you were like, oh, okay. And it almost made you feel better, like, to have that answer.
Oh,
is that fair?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes. It made me feel so much better, and it allowed me to give myself so much more grace, knowing that, my struggles were validated. And that, especially, I know for a lot of autistics, including myself, we're always looking at our peers, and, holistic peers or neurotypical peers. And, there's a natural progression of things as far as, professionally, as far as family, as far as kids, et cetera, et cetera. And I always felt like I was behind. And it was really frustrating for me because I couldn't say, for example, keep a job longer than 3 years is the longest I've ever been in a job. Most of the time it was just a year or two. I also struggled, just getting up and going to work much more intensely than someone who just, disliked their job. I suffer from burnout, or what I now know is burnout, from having to mask all day in a professional setting. So yeah, it just gave me it gave me the why, and it allowed me to say and perceive myself, instead of someone who was always behind and that I was broken and that there was something wrong with me. I now perceive myself as, wow, look at what I have accomplished, being that I've been autistic this whole time without support, and unknowingly like struggling for a reason that I had no idea. So yeah, it totally shifted my perspective. And of course, then the typical light bulbs start going off and everything started connecting, like, oh, that's why I do that. Or, oh my God, that's why I did that. Or, oh my God, that made sense why this situation happened. And it was socially awkward as fuck. And oh my gosh, it's because I didn't get it. And that's okay.
So, I think you've touched on so many things that are so relative to our community, right? Like this idea of, especially, so we'll start with people that get diagnosed or recognize that they're autistic with or without a medical diagnosis as adults. There's this switch in shame and guilt and blame and negative emotions to coming to ourselves with grace and compassion. And I think that's one thing that I see mirrored almost every single client or person that I work with that becomes aware of anything about themselves, but specifically that they're autistic. It's like this, holy cow, that's why I've struggled. That's why I've felt alone. There's so many times that, people are surrounded by family and friends, but autistic people still feel very alone, even when surrounded by people. And I think that that's one of the big realizations that happens, and just touching on that, like being able to come to yourself with grace and compassion. The other big thing that you talked about that I think is super, super relevant in our community is holding a job, the ability to work in these spaces that are neurotypical spaces, right? And that even neurotypicals a lot of times are being damaged in, right?
Exactly.
And so there's this difficulty, and it's a episode that I'm sure that we will touch on, jobs and working as autistics, and in the autistic community, working in these jobs that are made for neurotypicals and the ableist society and all of those things. But I think that's a really important point that you brought up, and it ties kind of into what led me to finding my own diagnosis of being autistic, is my burnout from the job that I was doing. And I just hit this wall, and it was just like, I could not function at all. And
I've been there.
And it was like having to figure out what is going on with me, and then just having to pull these different layers off, almost like an onion, right? And it started for me, really started in 2017, when I started to kind of dissect what was happening with me and kind of take off these masks. And then it really catapulted itself through those next couple years to be able to figure out that I am autistic, and that is why these things are happening. And autistic burnout is a thing, which is super common for people to recognize that they're autistic because of autistic burnout. So I want to touch on that for our listeners that aren't aware of what autistic burnout is. So it's after a period of time, and it's a fluid amount of time. It can be one situation, or it can be a long drawn out process of weighing down on us, right? So having to mask is a huge part of what plays into autistic burnout. So I was showing up as a neurotypical in these work settings, working 80 hours a week. And so I wasn't able to regulate any of my internal senses. And so all of my masking skills finally just dropped off, and I could not answer a telephone call. I could not do any type of executive functioning. I could not like sort my thoughts at all. I was having consistent autistic meltdowns, just crying.
Yep,
And,
a lot of crying.
having no
Yep.
clue what was going on, because in the world, that's not what autism, quote unquote, looks like, right? That's still
Yep.
not what I saw when I was seeing these things. And it wasn't until I got into the research and talked to people that are actually autistic, and they're like, hey, friend, like, let's have a conversation about your neurology. And so, yeah, but anything about autistic burnout that you want to touch on for our listeners that kind of aren't aware?
I just wanted to say that it happened to me around actually the same time, 2017. And I was actually fired from my job, my last actual like workplace job. And what would happen for me with any job, but this one was just, it was just because it had been compounded. So this was like my, I say, third or fourth burnout that I actually experienced before knowing what it was. But for me, my burnout was just very much like you said, but also it triggered my suicidal ideation. So I was severely depressed and I had unbelievable anxiety and I was suicidal. And I was just like, it was actually a blessing that they fired me.
Sure.
But I felt like, okay, here we go again. I'm back at zero again. And that is just demoralizing in and of itself for anybody, but let alone us autistics who are constantly having to struggle to stay employed, or to find, not only struggle to stay employed, but once we have to find employment again, that process of being interviewed, that process of the executive functioning, of having to fill out all the applications, that, all of that is just
tying
the
in
anxiety.
any type of like dyslexia, dyscalculia with all of the forms and just compounding. Yes.
I hate forms. I am so bad at forms. Literally trigger my anxiety. And then the interview process, in the sense of having to meet somebody new, which I have social anxiety, having to find the location and knowing where to park. I am not the best parallel parker. And so if I can't find a parking space, I can parallel park, but that causes
keep driving around.
Exactly. And then, trying to find a place to park, then getting inside, and then being overstimulated by a new situation, new people.
We have to talk about the time that I'm supposed to be there, and that whole situation.
It's just, and then of course, for me, shaking hands. I hate shaking hands.
The expectation of eye contact.
Yes, all of that. And so, yeah, I definitely experienced burnout. I was very much suicidal, and I'd actually planned, I think 2018? Like I wasn't going to be here in 2018. I literally was like, I'm done. And I actually had a friend at the time like motivate me to stay. She was just like, well, if she had lived in Hawaii before and she was trying to get back to Hawaii, and she's like, look, if you stick around and I get back there, you're coming with me. And she's like, it's not a choice, so you got to stick around. So just that small thing of giving me something to look forward to, and someone being there and supportive, literally helped, like kept me around. Otherwise I wouldn't be here right now. Burnout is more than just, oh, I'm tired. It's more than just, oh, I hate my job. It's literally like you're paralyzed with fear and anxiety and suicidal ideation, and you just can't function.
Lost. And just,
you're just,
and the other big thing about it is, there's shame in it. Not only are we feeling all of these burnout symptoms, but it comes with shame, because we also know that we, quote unquote, should be able to do X, Y, and Z, right? So it's not like, it's similar to the conversation about a meltdown is different than a tantrum, because in a meltdown, there is shame tide,
Yep.
when the meltdown is over, when the burnout is over, there is so much shame. And my husband and I joke about how we used to have to go on an apology tour after we would either go through burnout or have a meltdown. Then we would have to compound our trauma by apologizing for all of the things or to all of the people and all of this stuff. And it's just so much weight
Yes,
to carry. And
exactly.
so it's a struggle. And again, I just thank you and all of our listeners. I know that we have a ton of people in our community that also struggle with suicide, and whether that is passively or not, it is, thank you all for staying. And I think that's one of the big reasons why both of us, if I can speak for both of us, I think that's a big part of why we want to have this community, is to be able to touch some of those people in the way that our lives have been touched, right? Your friend who was able to stand there with you or be there with you and give you just one little glimpse of a reason to stay. And I think the more of us have a voice and a platform and can help build more people up, the stronger we become as a community. So, thank you, Asiatu, for being here, and all of our listeners for helping kind of cultivate that space. The other thing that you had talked about, we got into a little bit of like that you also struggle with social anxiety. I know I also have general anxiety disorder and struggle with social anxiety as well. What other things do you have that are combined with your being autistic?
What isn't?
Broad, right?
So much.
Obviously, we probably won't hit on all of them here, but we can talk about some of them to let people know.
Auditory processing disorder.
Yeah, check.
Dyscalculia.
Yes.
However you pronounce it.
I'm not the one to ask.
The math and the numbers thing. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
ADHD, anxiety and depression are my main ones.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so same for most of those. So I was originally diagnosed as bipolar, but now, do what?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that was many years ago. That was probably like 2012-ish. I was diagnosed as bipolar, but my people, my team now feel like that was a misdiagnosis and it was just me being autistic. So I am autistic. I have ADHD. I have generalized anxiety disorder. And then also dyspraxia. So do you have that one? It's more of like...
I do have dyspraxia.
Yeah.
I'm also left-handed, so it's more common in people and lefties.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting and good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that little tidbit. And also audio processing. Audio processing is probably the one that I find inhibits me the most from, like on the scheme of things. Like my dyslexia is, I don't know if mild is fair to say. But I know that, it doesn't, like, I still read and it doesn't keep me from reading, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's like, I just wanted to say, like, I have it.
I think you're just better at coping with it.
Oh.
Because I think it's like
That's such a nice perspective. Thank you.
Because I think what people don't realize is, instead of it being something being mild, it's more so we've just learned better coping. To me, that's how I interpret it.
So my internalized ableism is showing in my fact of like needing to label it, right? Needing to have a level to it. But yeah, you're exactly right. And then obviously, so on top of that, then we have the things that aren't necessarily like neurological and directly tied to being autistic, but like I know PCOS is something that I have and is very common.
Check.
amongst, yeah, check
we
for you.
We both have.
Yeah. And then also as a child, I had a pretty significant speech impediment that I finally have kind of what they refer to as grown out of, but I have not. Like, it still happens, especially when I'm like telling a story and not paying attention to my mouth. So it's a very conscious grew out of it, if that makes sense. But those are some of the things. And CPTSD, I also struggle with, so, which is also very common. And I don't know, like, I would venture to say that most autistics living in this neurotypically based society would have trauma, specifically CPTSD. So I think it's hard to kind of separate the two of those within our community sometimes. But
I also have dyspraxia, which, for those who are listening, it's basically like coordination and physicality and coordination issues. It can also manifest as speech issues as well. So yeah, I also had a speech impediment as a kid, and that I quote unquote grew out of. But I'm still always tripping over my words, or, you know, occasionally stuttering and things of that nature. So, and I think, I don't know how much of that is like the source of it being my physicality or my neurology, or both. So, because I have dyspraxia, so that can manifest as, you know, speech issues.
Right.
But I'm also autistic and, you know, have a different neurology. So yeah, I don't know. But either way, yes, I have. I was, as a child.
Either way, yes.
Yes. And as a child, I was very clumsy, very clumsy. I'm still clumsy, but I just learned how to cope better.
Yeah.
So I'm not falling nearly as much as I used to as a kid. I would also commonly as a kid walk into the corners of things because of my spatial awareness. Like, I struggle with spatial awareness.
I really struggle with spatial
so
awareness.
My hip would always just be super bruised from just walking into shit. And then I would trip over imaginary stuff. Like, my friends would like make jokes how we would just be walking along, and the next thing they beside them, and the next thing you know, I'm no longer there, and they just look down on the ground, and I'm just like, and they're like, what happened? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just like, I just tripped all the time. And I used to drag my feet a lot. So yeah, all common classic autistic, you know, dyspraxia.
I'm a tiptoer. I tiptoe. I know that's another semi-common neurodivergent thing.
When I'm excited, more so than anything.
Like a stim, kind of, almost like a happy feet stim.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a
my husband does happy feet too. So. I'm more of a happy hand stimmer.
I do happy hands too, but I do my fists. So it's like, instead of that, it's I
love it.
So
So other than falling as a kid, were there other things, like looking back, like hindsight, in your life where you were like, oh, I'm so autistic?
Oh my God, so many experiences. A lot of things were rooted in me taking things literally.
Same.
And I just, and like, people would laugh.
And not knowing, like,
and I'm like, I don't know what's so funny, or like what the joke is. I don't really get it. I can't think of an example as of in this moment, but I would always take things literally. Oh, I remember the I can't believe I'm saying this, but growing up, I remember the song "It's Raining Men," and in my mind being so fucking confused, like how and why is that like such a positive song? Because everybody liked it, and they're just like, oh, that's my song and stuff. And I'm like, why would it be like, why would you want men to rain? Like, that just sounds painful. Like, you have these big old men falling on you and shit. Like, that's not cool, and it's painful to them. So that's like one example. Like, other things that I realized, my clumsiness. Oh, I'm also a really picky eater. And I was a really picky eater as a child. And I think that was like one of the biggest indicators when I was doing research, that I was autistic. I was just like, I would eat the same food, same safe foods. Literally, I would only eat about 10 things. Like, as a kid, my mom would always, me and her battle about like trying new things, and you never know unless you try it. And I was like, I know I'm not gonna like it because I can smell it.
You don't know what I know.
Exactly. Like the texture, like I know I'm not gonna like it. And 9 times out of 10, that was true. I didn't like it.
Sure.
But yeah, like the typical autistic, like I love any type of French fry. Every type of French fry, all the French fries, all the potatoes.
Give me the potatoes.
All the potatoes, just all the potatoes.
Yeah,
pasta as a kid.
Pasta.
I loved pasta as a kid. I can't really digest it now, but without sauce. Like I did not like.
Oh yeah, butter pasta.
Marinara, butter pasta. Yes, it's still it was my comfort food for years. Like I love butter pasta.
It's my husband still. We just had butter pasta like 2 nights ago, actually.
I love butter pasta. I wish I could digest pasta, but I can't at this point. Yeah. So yeah, what are some things that you realized as a kid that you now know, looking back, it's like autism?
Yeah, so much.
I know,
like
right?
every memory that comes back, I'm like, oh, you sweet baby autistic child. So specifically though, I'm very much a verbal stimmer. So for our listeners that don't know, stimming can come in so many different forms. Like it looks different for every autistic. And one of my stems is that I verbally stim by making up my own songs, doing the whole things verbally. And when I stim, it's a way to regulate myself. And sometimes it's a way to help me relax. And so when I was younger, and I'll be candid here and say, as an adult still, when I need to use the bathroom, I have to sing so that my body can relax enough to like sit on the toilet and use the bathroom. And so as a kid, I would like sing at the top of my lungs, just happy little kid in the bathroom, right? Well, I was getting ready to start school. And my sister went to my mom and said, like, listen, we have to talk to Corey about singing at school, like in the bathroom. Like we had to tell her, like, kids will make fun of her. And, obviously they were doing what they thought was best at the time. And I love them just the same. And so anyway, they told me that I couldn't, sing anymore when I went to the bathroom. And I don't know if I still did or not, or how that all turned out. Like that memory stops there for me, but like that is one of the things that I remember. And now I just allow myself to just sing my little heart out.
I could just imagine little Corey just
just like, just trying to get myself regulated, like just trying to get myself in the right space.
Awesome. Oh my God, that's so cute. I'm very much a verbal stimmer, and it comes in the form of, if somebody says something, it'll trigger a song.
Okay.
And then I'll just start singing it out loud. And most of the time, friends,
you and I do that constantly.
Most of my friends like are neurodivergent or autistic too, so like they get it. But I remember growing up and like people just being like, why are you randomly just bursting into song in the middle of a conversation?
What is wrong with you?
Exactly. And I'm like, just like earlier you said, we'll just let it flow. And then in my mind, I'm like, let it flow, let it flow. And it's always like my brain is like a musical jukebox, like all the time. Like it's just random snippets and just songs just playing. And then it'll stay in my head playing in the background for a while. So if I'm having a conversation, it's like playing in the background. And then as soon as there's a pause or something, then I'll just start singing it again. And people just like, wait, what? Like, why are you still singing that? It doesn't matter. It could be like 20 minutes later, an hour, like I'll just randomly just burst out with it. And I love verbal stims though. They're so fun.
Me too.
And I usually do it when I'm excited and when I'm super comfortable. So to me, it's like a testament to the person that I feel that comfortable that I don't have to mask. And I can allow that side of me to, to be seen. So
for sure. I love that. Yeah. I'm also a verbal stimmer with like words. Like there are certain words that just feel good to say. Like there's this one movie, and it's not even like a great movie, so that part doesn't matter. But the name of the person, the last name is Bondurant or something like that. Well, it feels so good for me to say it. So all the time, just randomly, I'll be in one room, my husband in another, and I'll just be like, Bondurant. And it's like, what? But it just feels so good.
Yeah,
like sometimes
I love words. Like I've always loved words. I love the way certain words sound. Certain words match their definition, how like the sound of what they're saying like matches like the actual definition. I love words. Gosh, I love words. I love expressing myself with the written form. Like words are just awesome. But yeah, like
so
my sister's ex-husband's grandfather, who's now passed, but he used to always say good googly moogly. And so it's just like this really like, 80 something year old man, if when he was really excited, he'd just be like, good googly moogly. Like that always stuck with me. And so I catch myself every once in a while, like something will happen and just my brain will just automatically just say it. And I just have this big smile on my face. And then sometimes I'll say it out loud and it just reminds me of him. So like he was a really cool guy. But yeah, googly moogly, good googly moogly.
I'm so glad that stuck with you because it's awesome.
I know, right? Good googly. Now you're gonna say it. I guarantee it. Your husband's gonna be like, "What the hell?
Where did this come from?"
You're like, "Great, a new one."
Yeah, well, he'll probably be happy to get a new one in the mix. So, what if you could say, what is your favorite thing about being autistic? Is there like something specifically that is like your favorite thing? Like, I know that we love being autistic. Like,
so many favorites. Can I narrow it? I'll just say top 3 because
sure,
I don't think I can narrow it down so much.
I mean, this is your show. You can say as much as you want.
I can do what I want. The first thing is my creativity. Like I love being a creative. I love creating content. I love Canva, as everybody can see.
Yes.
I love Twitter because I'm always using it as like my social media diary. So yeah, my creativity. Oh, and the way that I dress and my style. So everything is just, I love art and creativity. That's definitely one. Yeah. Another thing is my ability to see patterns and connections that most people don't. To the extent that I can literally look at a picture of somebody and break down pretty much their personality, their struggles, their weakness, their strengths, which is what I do when in my coaching. The first thing I ask is for a recent picture, and I can basically start from there.
Yeah, you're so good at it. You're so intuitive.
Like, my intuition and goes hand in hand with that. And then lastly, I would say I love my childlike energy and essence. And I think people a lot of times misconstrue autistics, childlike exuberance for being immature or childish. Mm-hmm. And I think there's, a difference for sure. So I love the fact that, I can walk around saying good googly moogly. I love the fact that I worked with kids and I was a teacher, a preschool teacher specifically for many years, because I loved working with children and their energy and their essence. I still say stuff like my tummy hurts. Like it's just naturally just, it's just how I talk. But that also doesn't equate to, me not being extremely self-aware, extremely communicative, independent, self-sufficient.
Extremely an adult. Like
exactly. I'm very much an adult, but I still like to play and I still like to have a good time. And, I have that exuberance. Yeah. And then especially when I'm excited, it's just like, I'm a big kid. Like I really am just a big kid and I love it. And I was just like, one of my favorite quotes of all times is, you don't become old because you stop playing. Wait, you don't stop playing because you become old. You become old because you stop playing.
There you go.
And that's always resonated with me. So yeah.
I love that. And I think, you embodied a lot similarly to me. I know we're both shocked. But we told everybody ahead of time that like there's a lot of things that we share. So you mirror a lot of those things in me. And I think the one thing that I would add on would be and I guess kind of this is like what you talked about with the second thing, but my ability to connect to not only people and animals and things that have a pulse. But like my tarot decks, you know, I have this ability to connect to things that I never recognized was a gift until I recognized that I was autistic. And it kind of like opened up this thing for me where I realized, you know, like everyone's not living the same experience that I am. Everyone's not masking 24/7 to fit into these boxes. You know, not everybody feels as deeply as I feel. And, you know, I really see those things as gifts now. And, you know, a blessing that I can, you know, like share with other people. So I think that connection and that ability to tap into that connection, and similar to what you said about the like childlike essence, that ability to tap into not like my innocence, but like my sweetness. Like there's a piece of my soul that will always be, just pure joy and happiness and love. And no matter all of the darkness that I've seen and gone through and experienced, and there's still the ability for me to tap into that space. And I find that in our community, that is a gift that a lot of people outside of our community don't have. So I think that I would probably tie that in there. But otherwise, I think everything you said is fully mirrors what I would say as well, the creativity piece and everything. So full agree. So there was something else that you had mentioned that I was going to talk about, but now I don't remember.
Neurodivergence.
Pretty much.
Working memory. Not so much. My working memory doesn't work very hard.
That's true. Like it's already on. We're already somewhere else.
My working memory,
I know.
Just go with it.
Yeah, it happens.
Oh, I will say this, which will lead me into another question that I have for you, is one of the things I love about being autistic is our keen sense of justice. Totally forgot about that part. And like you said, our ability to connect with everybody and to connect with other people, multi perceptions at one time. And I think because we have this keen sense of justice, that's the root of it, and why we're so passionate to help other people, because we know what it feels like to be isolated. We know what it feels like to be invalidated. We know what it feels like to be oppressed. And we don't want other people to feel that, because we are so connected to every living thing. And I mean, every living thing. Like we feel it all. I'm talking about the bugs. I'm talking about blades of grass. I'm talking about the trees, the bees, like everything. Like
everything buzzes.
Exactly. Everything that like has any kind of life to it, we connect to. And so I think that's also. So my question is, why are you so passionate about social justice?
I think that's it. I think that through my life I have been very privileged, and I've held a lot of privilege in my world. And I've also held a lot of struggles within that. And so as I've grown, I've always kind of been that advocate for people that didn't have a voice or didn't feel like they had a voice, or there wasn't space for their voice. And I would always try to like kind of stand in that gap for them and with them. And I remember like in high school, I got into, a pretty decent amount of trouble. Like I got kicked out for what they called bullying, like me bullying. But what had happened in reality was that there was a person that was bullying other people in the queer community and people that were disabled. And she was very popular. And so she had been bullying and starting rumors and doing all of these things that I felt were unfair. And so I told her about that. And, I was angry. And so that kind of came out in my tone. And so long story short, I ended up getting in trouble for the situation. And so I know throughout my entire life, I've had this like deep need to kind of be able to stop the injustice or step into whatever role that is for me, because of my own lived experience, but also like we've talked about, my ability to feel other people's injustices to a point. And, being able to really come into myself and understand myself while at the same time doing my work as an oppressor in different parts of my life. I've been able to now kind of come into this space of using my privilege in the spaces that I have it, and using my lived experience and what I feel from others and the justice of others to kind of mold this like space for my social justice work. So I think everything that we've talked about, and it's kind of been this like underlying thing that I've had my entire life, to just kind of seek out where people are feeling held down or bullied in their own sense, and kind of either stand with them or speak in the space where I'm able to and they may not be. And so, so for as long as I can really remember, that's kind of been like deep in me. So
me too.
Yeah. Same for you, I would imagine.
Always been a champion for the underdog. Always.
Yeah.
Always been a champion for the underdog. And I'm just like, and it's passionate in us, you know what I mean? Like for autistics, because we feel so much. So like when we're passionate about something, it's all or nothing. And so it's just like, no, you're not being fair. You're not being, just. We want equity, and we're just like, So to me, it's such a beautiful gift to have, to be able to, connect people, to mediate for those who are actually open. That's the key. To help them perceive things differently from their own personal experiences, and to teach empathy. Yes. And I think if the neurotypical society could understand, and value us as we are, I think that would be one of the things that they would realize that we could teach them, is how to truly be genuinely, authentically empathetic to somebody else's perspective and privilege.
Yeah. I hear you and completely agree. And, I'll add to this conversation that in one of the things outside of being autistic in our autistic and neurodivergent community is, my husband is a man of trans experience. So he's a trans man, and has really kind of over the last, 10 plus years that we've been together, I've seen this piece of shattering, like earth shattering evil done to a community of people. And I'm speaking of the trans community at this point. And it was a part of life that I had never witnessed firsthand, because even though I am non-binary and I have struggled with gender in my life, not in the same way that he has in his experience. And so it's very different. And so that for me was very eye-opening and humbling to, again, my privilege within the queer community, and how, although I am non-binary and non-binary is under the trans umbrella, there are different experiences within that, and I can still be in it and also use my privilege outside of it, if that makes sense. And so
completely.
Yeah. So, the queer experience and what the trans community has gone through, even within the LGBTQ plus community, has really opened up my eyes and kind of lit that other fire underneath of my social justice-ness, to really like stand in that gap as well. And, I think that, it just amplifies by the fact that I'm queer, and I get to witness my husband so close, and see how his daily life multiple times throughout his day is affected just by the fact that trans people aren't accepted. You know what I mean? So I think that queerness also has played a huge role in my life, not only being queer, but being so close to people that I love and adore that are also struggling within our community in different ways.
Yep.
So, and I know that, you also identify as queer. So how does that kind of play into your social justice world? I know I kind of like talked about my stuff, but I want to hear your end and experience as well.
Very similarly. Even before I identified as queer, or I felt comfortable identifying as queer, and even before I felt comfortable coming out as agender, what brought me to the queer community was trans Black women and how they're literally being slaughtered, and it's a problem.
Yes.
And within the Black community, transphobia is so rampant, and a lot of it is tied to Christianity, which is a whole nother show. But yeah, seeing that their treatment is what ignited in me, like, just my introduction, I guess, into the LGBTQ community, because I was like, this is not okay on any level. I want to learn and be educated and to advocate, obviously not, silencing or speaking over, but, just putting out education information for people to know. And specifically within the Black community, a lot of Black men aren't even aware of the epidemic that is occurring of trans Black women, being killed, and not only killed, but like tortured and killed. And
brutally murdered.
Yes. Brutally murdered. Exactly. So I think just having that sense of justice of everybody and being able to hold multiple truths at once. So we're naturally have a mentality of both and, not either or. Mm-hmm. And so I was just, I was like, this is not okay. And if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, it's all Black lives. You can't sit up there and, pick and choose what you deem is acceptable for a person to live, like literally just fucking live, which pisses me off to no end. Mm-hmm. So, but then I started delving down into, I had like queer experiences in college and, middle school and high school, but I hadn't really processed it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until probably just a few years ago that I was like, wait a second. Yeah. And so then I realized, the more I got into like the spectrum, and I even had friends telling me, they're like, you're way more queer than what you think you are. And I'm like, no, like, whatever, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. And I was just like, I just wasn't ready, which is totally fine.
Sure. Yeah.
But I always knew, like, and then the whole gender thing, like, I've always struggled with my gender, which is common amongst autistics. Mm-hmm. For those who are listening. And I've always thought the concepts just never resonated with me. And I actually have a brother who's 17 or 18 months older than I am. And so growing up, like, I remember distinctly, him being able to not have a shirt on, when we were younger. And it got to a point where obviously, like, I couldn't. And in my mind, being autistic and being very logical and being very black and white, I'm just like, if he can do it, why the fuck can't I? And I'm just like, we're only 17 months apart. Like, what the fuck? Yeah. And I just remember being enraged and confused at the same time. Mm-hmm. So from that point on, I never really, and then I was a sociology major at Spelman. And so I really didn't that's when I really learned and delved into, gender being a social construct. And then it just hit me that I'm just like, oh, well, no wonder it doesn't resonate with me, because it's a social norm. And of course, now looking back, I'm like, because I'm fucking autistic. It was a social norm that didn't make sense to me, and one of the many. And so I was just like, now it makes sense as to why it never resonated. And it's not who I am, and it's never who I have been. And I've always been pretty much like a tomboy in a sense. Mm-hmm. And not the most quote unquote feminine. And I had, older brothers, and I always gravitated more so towards men in my young adult life than girls, because girls have a whole lot more social rules that I just didn't get. And I was just so and they were always mad at me. And I was just like, I don't understand what like situation or unspoken rule of like womanhood did I break now, of friendship? Like, what the fuck? Like, I'm trying, like, I'm not trying to be a bitch.
I'm
like,
trying.
I just don't get it. I don't understand. Why are you mad at me? Like, and of course people just like the girls just, or the women were just like, oh, like, how rude of you to like, flirt with a guy that I like. I'm like, first of all, I'm not even flirting. I don't even know what flirting is.
Right.
And I'm like, secondly, I'm like, I don't even want him. Like, what are you talking about? But yet you're mad at me. And I'm just like, okay. So yes, stuff like that would happen to me all the time. So yeah, it was a whole roundabout way of saying like the whole queer and the LGBTQ community, and then also figuring out my whole gender just solidified it. And I was just like, and I didn't even know until recently, literally within the past few months, that like trans includes non-binary and agender people. And I'm just like, oh, I guess I'm that too. I just keep on adding shit to my identity. I was just like, give me all the labels, just everything.
So for our people that are listening, so there's cisgender, which is meaning that you still identify as the gender that you were assigned at birth. And then there's transgender, which means that you don't identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. And some non-binary, agender, autigender folks do call themselves trans, and some do not, and both are valid. Trans is an umbrella term that some people choose to take and some people don't. Within the trans community, there's trans binary and there's trans non-binary. So I am trans non-binary. My husband is trans binary because he's a trans man. So just to kind of get into that a little bit, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in future updates and that kind of stuff, but just to give a kind of general idea about what those terms are when we use them. So there's that. But yeah, okay. So thank you for sharing, your experience with, being queer and being autistic, and, going into why it's so important for you to do the work that you do, because it's so much more than just social justice work and just educating. Like, you are, a beacon for your community in so many different ways. So, thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'll just say thanks for doing the same, because you are doing the exact same work, just from a different perspective, or I wouldn't even say a different perspective. The only perspective you don't do it from is the Black perspective, because you ain't Black. But other than that, like, we do the same work. So
other than that, we pretty much mirror each other. Yeah.
So. Exactly. And not only that, but I would know I'm autistic, literally would not know if it hadn't been for you in that post. So I don't think I've ever thanked you, but yeah, like, I'm doing it now and I'm doing it publicly. So thank you so much for helping me figure out the last piece of myself that I didn't even know I was like, yearning for, in the sense of it all making sense. And it's the root of everything that had been happening to me. And I just want to thank you for that, because I am here in this moment and doing all of the things because of you. So thank you. I really do appreciate the work that you do.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'm honored to have provided you what you needed to receive in that moment. I love to witness you and just be part of your journey as well. So we can continue to gush over each other, or we can just let people know where they can find us. So Asiatu, if people are looking for you online, where can they go?
They can go to asiatucoach.com is my website, or on social media, Asiatu Coach.
Sweet. And you can find me at mmhealingservices or at the Autistic Astrologer on Facebook and on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us for this bonus episode on getting to know the hosts. We release new episodes monthly, but if you want to receive more content like this, one-on-one communication, or just support us, we would love to have you join our Patreon, where we offer exclusives, merchandise, bonus updates, and live interactive chat forums. You can also find us on social media at audacious.autistics, or email us directly at audacious.autistics@gmail.com. Be sure to share your stories and questions with us on social media. We love to connect with you.
Thanks for being here. Remember to live unmasked and out loud.